Okay, we're live. Hi, everybody.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. We're at governance call number 12 this week. So glad everybody came out today. And we'll kind of run through our normal agenda as we always do. So starting out are our stand-ups. And for me, really quick, I got some resource updates I was working on last week. I'm going to continue through that this week. And otherwise, just kind of staying heads down on small topics. I don't have any blockers on my end. And yeah, that's about it for me. Over the next week, I'll just keep working through GitHub. Anybody else that would like to do a stand-up?
I can do one. Hey everyone. Good morning. Good to see everyone. Um, Thank you for all the contributions so far. I saw those come in to GitHub. I'm just about done going through all of them. I've read through all of them, but quickly, and have taken some notes. So I'm definitely going to go back today and do a more comprehensive read. And there's just so much information in there. I originally was thinking that this would go into one sort of mega blog post, but I had this idea that we can discuss later that maybe even with this content, we could do a Gov blog series. So like, I think that we could break this content out into several different topics. I'm thinking it could be hosted on the Blockstack blog, or people could access it on the Blockstack blog, but it could link to a sigil blog or something, just so it's independent and can be contributed to from this group independently. So we can talk about that later. But I was really excited. Thank you for all your contributions. I have a lot of notes here that we can talk about later as well. The other thing that I have been like heads down really focused on is I've mentioned the future of community management before, and I've been doing a lot of thinking around this. A lot of this has to do with just further decentralization and figuring out how the broader community can participate, not only participate, but also attain higher levels of privilege through participation. So not just through holding tokens, but I have come across two frameworks that I think are really promising. There's one that I'm definitely leaning more toward, and I'll share details in the chat after I explain it. But I've been looking at Tezos's moderator elections, and also Stack Overflow's theory of moderation. I know a few different projects do community moderator elections, and it seems to make sense. The reason I don't totally love it is because I don't think there's enough participation in voting to actually elect moderators that really represent the whole community. So I've been looking at this theory of moderation, which breaks down moderation privileges into super granular levels. It basically amortizes the moderation costs over hundreds of users. So I'll share that from Stack Overflow. I think it's really promising. And it's something that I would really like to consult with this group on, and get further ideas on building out, maybe in the next couple of months or so. Maybe that's ambitious, but I think that we could definitely do it. And oh, that does it for me. I thought I had another bullet point. But there are no blockers on my end other than myself. I think I just need to share some of these notes with everyone else. I have a bunch of questions having to do with community management that I think you all will find interesting. And after I share that, I think we can get moving on it. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Jenny, for that. And anybody else have a stand-up for us this morning?
I can go quickly. Yeah, I guess one thing is responding to Jenny's requests for feedback for the blog post. It was a really good exercise, Jenny. I think the questions you asked and the way you structured them were, I found it very helpful. It sort of inspired me to think deeply in multiple directions about what we've done and where we're going with this initiative. So thank you for that. I guess the other thing is not directly related, but we were talking just before we started the recording about all the interesting conferences that have happened lately, the virtual conferences like Ready Layer 1 and Consensus Distributed happening right now. I've been, not surprisingly, targeting a lot of the governance related talks, been learning a lot, taking some notes, also doing some broader reading on governance, including a really interesting preprint paper that a friend shared. I've sort of learned a lot, and it really puts a lot of sort of governance of blockchains and decentralized systems in the context of a broader landscape of sort of academic literature that goes way back. So I'll continue to kind of post links to these things as I find them in Discord, but also thinking a little bit about how to organize some of these thoughts into some sort of format that would be helpful to the group. So I just wanted to share that as well.
All right. Sounds like lots of fun stuff there. I like that. Thank you, Lane. Anybody else that would like to do a stand up before we get started?
Yeah, I have one. I've had some work in progress. I expect them to be GitHub issues eventually, but I figured I can, I noticed that with proposals, you guys are sharing collaborative docs before actually putting them into GitHub. So I can share something here with proposals I had in mind for the governance working group or the foundation. There's the models that are based on WAG Society and Technology, or Technology and Society, based in Amsterdam, and I figured there's a distributed model that we might find interesting because they have these very cool networks of developers, folks that work in digital fabrication, makers, professionals, and you know they work in a distributed network called the Fab Academy network. But they also have, you know, their own centralized version in Amsterdam that does some pretty cool things. And just looking at what they've done, I put it into a proposal structure that might be interesting, and hoping you guys can look through that and we can contribute together, help walk me through, you know, some of my first proposals. And I also have another proposal here that can go as a GitHub issue as well. And it's related to the Development Council, specific to the 201 peace treaty that I've mentioned here before. And hopefully it's basically the first proposal, but with the added layers of indigenous modes of production and organization that I've mentioned here before, that, you know, folks like Primavera de Filippi may be interested in, and put it in a new framework that Jude has laid out for us in terms of possibilities and what makes this our approach to governance unique in the BlockStack ecosystem. So hopefully you guys can check that out, and like I said, help me walk through some of my first contributions in this way. So yeah, I'm excited to see where that takes us, and hopefully it can kind of sum up some of the thoughts that I've been putting forward here. But yeah, that's all from me.
All right, thank you, Harold. And looking at that, man, these are well put together documents. I love this. I'm going to really enjoy reading through this and giving you some feedback. So thank you very, very much for putting those together. And as far as linking them to GitHub, you know, it's an interesting point. Like, you know, when you say we're sharing collaborative documents before we're creating issues or anything like that, I think if we were to really take a look at our core process and how we keep saying we want to do things, we might want just a placeholder issue of some sort that points to the document. That way we can say like, hey, this is, you know, it's managed as part of GitHub and we have it, and I can help you with that. But I'm glad you raised that point, and I love the docs as well. So really looking forward to looking through those. Before we get going here, is there anybody else who would like to give a stand up?
Essentially, I had the opportunity to read many articles about, you know, the governance, and then had a kind of understanding that the tension that is in this area, that is who rules, and then you what's the name of this? The interaction that we've seen is that code rules or human rules. But then that you Jason put that also, that comment, and so then that tension is very, very high, and then there's people, you know, say, well, we have to just do it. If there's a problem, we have to fix it, and so all that governance is a big issue, and then the ruling of code, of code language, and all that. So that's something that we have to really think about it. And then the other aspect I've been trying to promote the people, you know, to fill up the survey, and from this area of the world, Latin America, and also in Spain. So I hope we have seen some results on that. So that's Also in the videos I have put also there, but let's see if the people understand. But the thing is that it's a new concept of governance, and so the governance is not so much on the heads of the people. And Juliet put a very good also video, shared a video, a very interesting video that the people, you know, it has to be commanded by the people, you know, the governance.
Thank you, Philip. And I agree. You know, I think there's definitely a little bit of what Brittany talked about, where we're going to look at examples of having technical governance versus having like a regular procedural type area or anything like that as an option, what we've seen with some of the past projects and whatnot. And it's tough because there has to be a human element, and how do we control and regulate that human element? So definitely some interesting thoughts there. And unless anybody else has a stand-up, I think that's the perfect segue to move into the community survey. But I want to hold that space. Is there anybody else who would like to give one real quick?
I'll just wait for the foundation update.
Sorry, go ahead. Perfect time.
No, I was gonna say I'll just wait on those until I'll give my updates when we go through the foundation stuff. So thanks.
In your official section.
Sure.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Well, yeah, on that note, let's talk a little bit more about the community survey. You know, we brought it up last week, and we were talking about how we think we're starting to slow down, or at least seeing probably the results that we're going to see. And we really need to discuss like next steps, and if we don't solve that today, I'd like to at least put some kind of deadline on that so we can really get it moving. But before I get too deep into that, do you have any comments, Lane, or do you have an update for us?
Yeah, I just pulled it up. So the first thing that jumped out at me is there's like something like 7 or 8 responses from Chile. So I wanted to say, Philip, thank you. You're clearly your efforts are paying off. Probably other Latin American countries as well. We're at 57 total right now, and as far as I can tell, the last response actually came in on May 1st. So I think nothing has happened over the past, what is today? Today's like the 12th or the 13th, I think, right? The 13th. So nothing, I think, has happened over the past 12 days. So yes, we're definitely on a plateau.
All right, not on the thought of next steps, you know, we started talking a little bit about what we can do with the data, how we want to analyze it. What can we do to turn that into sort of an action item, or how can we get closer to that goal? Do you have any thoughts on that, Lane?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on our goals, right? The things we want to learn, the questions we are asking as part of the survey. I mean, both literally the questions on the survey as well as like the higher order questions that led us to do the survey in the first place. You know, I think I shared a lot of thoughts on that back at the beginning. I think I wrote like several pages on my thoughts on that, and I think it would be a good time for me to revisit them in light of the things we've learned since then and the results we've seen and stuff. I guess I'd also say there's some analysis here that we can immediately do. It just jumps out at us. Like I just tapped on the results button in Typeform, and I'm not digging into anything. And like one thing I think is quite interesting is that we have a very long tail of responses from like at least 24 countries, which I think is pretty cool. There's like a lot of responses from the United States and Chile, and then like a lot of places with 1 each. I think that's fascinating. It says something about you know, the geographical distribution of the ecosystem. So that sort of thing, I think like first order, you know, results are easy to read into, but there's obviously a lot more analysis that could be done. And I think, yeah, I mean, I'm happy to do some of this analysis. I think others in this group could probably contribute a lot to it. And then I think also, you know, we're going to want to make the data, or at least a lot of the data, public. You know, obviously removing email addresses and things for anyone in the community to come in and do their own analysis. That's something that worked quite well when we did some of these surveys in Ethereum. Another thing I'll just share that I just happened to notice is that it looks like almost all of the respondents did choose to provide an email address. So now we have this list of people that maybe have not been part of Discord, maybe have not been part of these calls, but to the extent that they've taken the time to answer the survey, are probably interested in governance. Also, I noticed on the front page here, it says the average time to finish the survey was more than 40 minutes. So maybe that's one reason. We actually had I don't know the exact number here, it's disappeared, but close to 200 people who started the survey. And I think that this is part of why we don't have as many results, because I think it's just a very long survey. And so I have to double check, but it may be the case that there's a lot of partial results here. People got halfway through it or something, so and the number might be higher actually.
That's fascinating, actually, because it felt like we had a good amount of engagement just from the amount of community buzz about it and just the way it was pushed out through several different outlets. So that's fascinating in and of itself. And I think in the short term here, would it be best, do we want to just kind of push that issue back to the group through Discord, see if we can get any more comments, and then look at releasing those results? Would that be our kind of short term, or how we want to release those results, I should say, for our short term?
Yeah, I guess I like your idea. I think we should ask people what they want to know. I don't know, does that sound reasonable? Like I mean, I guess people have taken the survey, so they should have some sense of what's on it, like ask what they're curious about, maybe as a starting point. I mean, so again, there's this initial set of things which we can very easily share, like total number of people who started, the geographic distribution, that kind of thing. But yeah, as far as further analysis goes, I would like to know what people would like to know.
Awesome, and I have the link to that as well. So I'm looking here just to see if anything else jumps out at me.
187 people started, 57 finished. That's a 30% completion rate. And the average time to complete, this is really striking, was 43 minutes and 46 seconds. So it's a long survey. I think what that means probably is that people opened it, started working on it, got partway through it, went away to have lunch, came back, in the afternoon. I'm guessing it's probably something like that.
That makes sense. And I think, from our lens of being involved in these calls and doing all of this, I think we were probably a lot faster to answer it as well. So that's actually, there's a few ways that could turn out to be really interesting. But yeah, so what I will do is I'm just going to share the issue in the chat here in a minute. And we'll make sure to push that out to Discord today, and we'll include some kind of ask that says like, hey, we're ready, we need to get this done, and we'll set like a soft deadline on it. I'm thinking Monday. Does that sound okay to everybody?
Yeah, I don't think it's a big ask, so I think that's okay.
Okay. Fair enough. So with that, we are going to move on to our next item on the agenda. Unless there's anything else anybody has to comment, feel free to jump in.
I think that the 43 minutes, there were a lot of concepts behind that. So then you have to go and check up, and I mean it's a learning experience to fill up the survey. I think that it was so in that sense, we still can promote as a way to learn. Or we can change it as a tutorial and make it as a tutorial and let people answer while they're working on the tutorial.
That's an interesting idea, to turn it around into a resource when we're done. And I kind of like that thought as well. So that's awesome. And moving on from there, next up, we were going to talk a little more about the blog post. I know, Jenny, you mentioned that you were thinking about a blog series and had some ideas. Would you like to share with us a little more about the blog post?
Yeah, so I actually think that I encapsulated most of my thoughts in my stand-up, and I wanted to put that idea out there to everyone else, just because as I was going through all of the updates, and I know I mentioned this to you, Jason, but I figured I would just do a rough draft of everything. And as I was going through all the information, I kind of got worried that I might compromise on the quality of all the updates. If I had to put all of it in one blog, I'd feel like I don't want it to be too long, and I don't want it to be too dismissive or reductive of some of the really great concepts and research that people have done, which is what led me to the idea of having a series. And I really like the style of, I've been thinking of doing this just for community stuff in general, but I really like the style of having like this is how we started our governance working group. Here are some pain points we ran into. Here's where we're at now. Here are some things that we think other groups can learn from or take away from us. This is what we are hoping to achieve in the next 2 to 3 months, and just being very personal and authentic in our approach and not prescriptive with anything, being like, this is what the Blockstack working group's experience has been, and these are the benefits that we've seen in the community so far. So the thinking is very rough, as you can tell. But I guess the first question is, what do you guys think of having a blog series? And I guess the next steps would be, what are some topics we think we could cover, and what sort of cadence we want to stick to for publishing. So to give you some background, the This Week in Blockstack newsletter, for example, that started off totally as an experiment. It was tweaked for the first few weeks, but people really liked getting those updates. And now there's like a very regular cadence for that newsletter, and even a way for other community members to contribute. So this could be something that turns into a very similar process.
Well, I can definitely say I'm open to the idea of a series. I think that we definitely have a ton of content there. And when you were describing everything in that personal and authentic sense, it made me think we're at this interesting point, right? Like we're where things are being formed. So at some point we're going to say, hey, we went out, we reached out to others, we did the research, but now we're going to start putting the foot down and saying, this is how we're doing things. And I think that's an interesting point to start making that commitment back to the community and saying, like, here's how we did it. Here's what we went through. These were the pain points. This is where we're trying to go. So it's almost perfect timing for that as well. So I like that idea.
Yeah, and I like the idea of trying to figure out the tone or the cadence and sticking to a consistent one. Especially the non-prescriptive one that I think is a good idea for this particular context. And and I apologize for my contributions to the updates. I know I had a very long post there. I think I misinterpreted.
No, don't apologize. I loved it. It's what made me think that we should do a series as opposed to just one blog.
Yeah, cool. When you were speaking, I figured that it may be my contribution that had you thinking along those lines. So, yeah, I think I had misinterpreted one of the bullet points in terms of a blog post specific about what makes the governance group unique or what have you. But yeah, I like the idea of the series, of course, and I dig the idea of sticking to a consistent cadence. So yeah, thank you kindly for this.
All right, so next steps, we'll work on opening up some issues to talk about like the cadence and maybe just putting up the idea of the blog series to see if there's any further comments. But I think that's a great idea moving forward. And is there any other comments on the idea of the blog post or series or anything like that before we move on?
I guess if putting a deadline on these contributions really helped to get us moving. So I can open an issue with a soft deadline for when we want to have a rough draft of the first blog. I'll have to talk to Mitchell and talk about, how we want to approach posting it to the Blockstack blog and where we as a group want it to be hosted. But maybe something within like the next week or two. That sounds reasonable. Maybe in the next week if we want to be ambitious. So I'll open up an issue with a deadline there, but also include the questions about cadence and other things and topics that we want to cover. Thanks.
Thanks, Jenny. I'm curious, actually. I guess this is probably a question for Brittany. Is there, like, what is kind of the communication strategy of the foundation to the extent that there is one? Is it going to have its own blog or medium or anything like that, or is there only going to be one for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, so what we've set up so far is a subscribe to a newsletter. So there can be a newsletter. I think the cadence of that at minimum would be monthly. And then like as there's more updates, it could be more frequent. There is also a blog attached to the website software that we're using. I would love to actually use something like Siegel or some of the Blockstack products that allow blogging. That way, I think that we could have distributed blogging, but then maybe the foundation can do summary posts that would be, you know, in the newsletter, kind of highlighting the different things and being an aggregator in that way. We do also have like a social channel through Twitter. Obviously, there's, you know, all the existing Blockstack channels like Discord and Telegram that are kind of open for anyone to contribute. So I think that those channels are the way to go, but I think it may be easier to have people independently blog and then we aggregate versus having a kind of multi-party publish thing. I'm open to thoughts on that though, if one idea sounds great and the other one sounds horrible or vice versa.
Just to share, right? So something that we saw in Ethereum was as the sort of independent initiatives, whether governance or project management or whatever, as they began to produce more content, it made less sense to try to go through the, let's say, bureaucratic process of publishing something on like the official ethereum.org blog. And ultimately, we ended up setting up independent blogs for a number of these initiatives. So I'm not saying we need one now. I'm not sure now is the right time for it. But if we have a cadence, a regular cadence, and we're putting out a lot of, you know, series of things, at some point it might make sense for us to think of a separate channel. And Brittany, to your point, I love the idea of syndication. You know, like we can have a home base for our content, but that doesn't mean it can't be syndicated to newsletters and blogs and things like that, like you're suggesting.
I agree too. I mean, using the Blockstack DApp is a fun way to do it, and I love that one anyway. I've used it for some of my own blogs, so I think that's a really cool approach. So I'm for that one. Does anybody else have any other thoughts or comments on the blog post or on any of these ideas before we move on?
One question for Jenny actually is, do you have like well, I'm not sure if she's on, she said she'll be right back, but I think she listed out a number of questions, which are a great format to write a blog post. For me, I sometimes am like, well, what is there to share? But I think that kind of laying out like what we intended to do, what we did. So I'll have her share kind of that list of questions, because I think it's a great prompt. It makes it maybe a little easier for creating content. Cool.
Yeah, definitely. You know, when I looked back through the GitHub issues and some of the ones that we had, even just going through question to question, it gave me a different view of answering versus asking me to come up with the entire content myself. So I'm definitely in agreement there. I think that's a great idea. Anything else before we move on?
Who do we have a sort of designated lead for, you know, making the first focused effort here on turning this into a draft? Is that something Jenny intends to do? Or Jason, if I remember correctly, I feel like you may have volunteered for this on the last call. I just want to make sure that like we know the next concrete steps here.
Definitely. So we were talking about the first draft. I believe that Jenny was going to share that draft, the rough draft with us, and she was working with Mitchell in the background to figure out on the Blockstack blog side. So
Right.
That's really our immediate next step. But from there, we'll be looking for an issue from Jenny that will show us a little bit more for what we want to do with the series, and a little bit more information from, let me see what I noted here. Oh, the cadence in publishing and a little bit of that too. So that'll be our next steps.
Thank you. You're way more organized than I am.
Trying my best. All right, well, I think that just about covers everything on the blog. And moving on to the next item on our agenda, we're going to come back to the SIPS process proposal, the SIP. Lane, do you have any comments or anything you'd like to update us on this week for that?
Not really. I got a bunch more great feedback from a few other people that I'm still in the process of going through and responding to. I think I'm repeating myself from the last call. Like, jump in if you haven't had a chance yet. Take a look. There's some great dialogue that's happening there. I'd love to hear feedback from other people. I'll have to defer to Brittany on concrete next steps here, because I think it's in the wheelhouse of the foundation.
Yeah. So thanks, Lane. And I know you've been a little bit on hold. So my ask to the Blockstack core engineering team is that they go in and then comment and provide feedback. So they've been active in the document this week, kind of debating some specifics. They have, the closest information to some of the very technical aspects of the current blockchain. And I think given the specificity of the SIP proposal process, which is excellent, they are the best people to kind of answer some of those questions. So the goal is to have like sort of some aggregated feedback, maybe resolve some of these open issues they brought up this week, and then, kind of continue to just like create a public home for that, because right now it's in a Google Doc, but maybe it becomes a GitHub, or potentially maybe like writing about it, kind of like what we learned and where we are, and then publishing that for comment. So it's like transparent before it's kind of put in a more static place, I guess. With the SIP proposal as well, it's kind of related to actually some of the other stuff we're doing at the foundation, which is another ask of the engineering team this week was that we start conducting the blockchain call publicly. So we have a reoccurring weekly meeting with the blockchain team. They go over sort of a stand-up of like what they're working on, what's getting shipped this week. And that practice of actually opening that to the public is what we want to start with. That can then serve as a technical developer call going forward. So like, many like different projects do that, like Ethereum, and Lane had suggested that, and I think that that's really great. And so actually we're working so that next week the blockchain call will be open. Maybe half of it will be open so that they can kind of get used to like, okay, we're broadcasting, let's think about how that may be different or not, but then eventually move it to like the whole hour long is public, people can weigh in. It's not just like a broadcast out, it's actually participants would be equals and sort of chiming in and stuff. So that part is not directly the SIP, but it's kind of related, and just thinking about the Stax process of time.
That's exciting. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
And as soon as I have the link, I will share with you guys too, the Zoom link for the call, because I think it's on Monday. I'm just having our admin double check that time still works for everyone.
I've been on both sides in these calls. Like I know what it can feel like to have these sort of debates, be public, and how uncomfortable that can be. That was definitely something we experienced in Ethereum, that CoinDesk articles would be out before we even finished the call. And it makes it very scary and very difficult to be completely honest and candid sometimes. So this is actually an aspect of it that we haven't discussed up to now, but I'm glad you mentioned it. It's something that I'll make a mental note about, and we can talk further about it, because I think there are some strategies that can address that.
Cool.
Interesting initiative. So yeah, we have to think about which way should be done in a more safe way.
Yeah, it's like, what's the training wheels look like, because I think there's some fear from the engineers of like the worst case scenario of like, oh, what if a bunch of trolls jump in, or what if, someone says something and it's like more speculative and it's not like concrete and people run with it. So I think it's just a little bit of a practice. So kind of like moving towards that over time. So happy to share that then.
Thank you very much for that. Any other comments on our SIPs process proposal or any of these items before we move on? Okay, so next up on our agenda, we're actually going to be hearing from Brittany for the Stax Foundation update. So I'll let you take over from here.
Yeah, so yesterday we had been invited to speak like Blockstack as a whole to give updates about the project. So yesterday I gave just a very quick talk at the Consensus conference. Of course, it was all digital, so they should have a recording that will be out after the event. But basically that 5-minute presentation was about the work that we've been doing here with the governance group. So kind of like what is, that we're creating a foundation, that it will be separate. It has these goals that we've, worked together on coming up with around like transparency and longevity. So I'm happy to sort of share that video, or I can share the slides. But with that, we actually turned on the website as well. So stax.org, thank you, Jason, is alive. As you can see, it's a very simple site, but if you guys have feedback on it, or like the wording, or this doesn't make sense, I would love to hear that, because I think you guys are closest to what we've been doing here, and it'd be really helpful to just get, you know, a second set of eyes, or 10 sets of eyes on kind of what the content is there. The next step in the foundation is actually announcing the foundation more formally next week. Is the plan. Again, this is like, there's like legal work that needs to get done, and until that gets done, we can't actually announce, so that's been the bottleneck there. But I think, I'm hopeful that it's like all coming together so that we'll be able to do that announcement very soon. So as I have more confirmed information, I can share like with this group first around those announcements, probably just in Discord. But the other thing is the bylaws of the foundation. So we are a nonprofit foundation out of Delaware. We've decided not to apply for tax-exempt status at this time. Tax-exempt status is what is like 501c3, C4, C6. Those designations are actually done, I think, at like a, I always get this, I think as a state level thing. So did I get that right? I might have switched that. It might be a federal level,
Yeah,
but
those are federal. I believe they're under the purview of like the IRS or something.
yeah, so we do not need one of those tax-exempt statuses to be a nonprofit.
Right.
So it will launch as a nonprofit, and if we decide down the road we want to add a tax-exempt aspect to it, we can do that. So with that, it means creating bylaws that are fairly open. And actually, if you look at the Zcash Foundation, they have their bylaws as public. Those basically are the default of what a nonprofit bylaws are. So we asked our law firm, they basically gave us a sheet. It looks identical to what they are also using. So I can send a quick summary of what some of those bylaws are. What it includes is, you know, what control does the board have? How do elections work? What is the time frame that those elections happen? There is a semblance of something called members. Members can actually decide on the, governing the board. But initially, actually, all of the members might actually be the board members. So, you know, you can sort of see like very centralized power, but over time deciding like how are members picked? How are they come into power? Is everyone a member? Is it a select group? Are there voting members and non-voting members? So all of that is really left up to the organization to determine. And again, looking again at Zcash, they actually have made 2 amendments to their bylaws since they've been operating. And those amendments are around membership. So like, what power do the members have? How do the members work? They're very brief. They're like a paragraph. So if you guys want to take a look at that too, I think it's a great reference of just like how they amended the default. And so for us, I think we have the opportunity to do that too. And this working group, I think, is a really powerful way to kind of evaluate these bylaws and make sure that they reflect what we want, but also give us the flexibility that when things need to change, we can do that with a perspective of a lot of people weighing in. So yeah, I think that's the update, but I can share the Zcash amendments so you can look real quick, and also just like the bullet points of what the bylaws mean.
I am curious, are we still considering firing everybody once a year and making them reapply?
Yeah, so I really like that aspect. So the default is actually a 3-year term for board members. So to me, I was like, well, is that what we want? Do we want something different? I'd be curious if you, what your take is as well on that. Right, this is like quite a number of bullet points. I was just sharing this with our legal team. So let's see if Zoom up. I don't think Zoom will let me do it, but if we have time, I can actually just share what those are if people are interested. If not, we can take that as a separate meeting.
Sure. Let me look over the rest of the agenda here. Was just covering some items that we were rolling over from previous meetings. So just to kind of recount those real quick, we had talked about the community research observer role and how as we do more research in the future that we have the method for doing that. We just need to sort of ratify it and close it out. Code of conduct as it relates to some of the founding document review, which is a lot of like what you're talking about now with the bylaws. So we can kind of merge those together. And languages and translation was just a meta topic to make sure that we keep that in the forefront of our minds as we continue down this road. And I know we did a little work with the survey there. And the last item was shared resources. And I think my biggest ask, or the only other thing that I'd love to get into is if anybody can help me get around this idea of sharing a Blockstack ID. I don't know if that's just something we need to set up. I mean, maybe it's going to require some technology or contracts or something else to do, but I love the idea and I think there's definitely some use cases for it.
Can you explain a little bit more?
Sure. So what I will do too is I can drop a link to the issue in here, but one of the thoughts I had is, you know, if we want to do a block survey or if we want to have an actual SIGL account for the Stax.gov organization, what would be the easiest way to share an ID if that's possible?
It's obvious, yes. Of course.
Yeah, so at this point, it's just a theory, but I do see some use cases where it's like, hey, you have a personal account and you have a corporate account or a business account or something like that. So I'm curious how that would fit into the ecosystem. And I think it would be a nice use case to learn through the Stax.gov organization. And I'll drop that issue in here as well.
Cool. Yeah, that's a great question. I think, you know, a lot of platforms early on, if you wanted to share an ID, like, you know, a corporate account's Twitter handle, you just needed to share a password. There wasn't sort of like multi-user access. So I think right now with IDs, I think the shortest way is sharing passwords, but I don't think that that's necessarily a great from a securities perspective, but or from a security perspective. So you're talking about securities law, but yeah, I think that that's interesting. I know that there is some dApps that have been built on Blockstack that they've thought about like enterprise versions, and then how do you create like a meta layer where it's like you belong to an organization, but your ID is independent. So
yeah, and that's exactly it. You know, we run into that whole not your keys issue. And if we were to release a key, there's no way to rotate it, or there's that I'm aware of anyway. So it's an interesting issue to dig into. So I'm just fascinated to get some more community input on that where possible, but nothing that we have to deep dive into here. But just with those last few things that I listed out, were there any other thoughts or comments? And you can find all of those in today's agenda as well with their linked issues and everything else. Okay. So with that, Brittany, if you want to take it away, we can take a look at a few things there, but I think that covers the rest of the call and everything else we were going for. So I guess my last announcement real quick is that next week's call will be on May 20th, same time. And yeah, so let's see what you have. I'll let you take over from here.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, thanks everyone. So yeah, I think let me see if I can do this in a easy way. I don't think I can upload a document, so I will just share the legal of Zcash here, since they have very similar bylaws. So this is their bylaws. Like I said, this is very similar to the default. Some of the components that we have, see if I can just open this in a Google Sheet.
Sorry to call you out there at the end.
No, no problem. I'm just, yeah, like I had it on my email, but I figured that's probably weird to share it. Okay, so if you do have your screen open, this is kind of the Cliff Notes version of what's in the bylaws. So for example, directors are the board of directors. Members are, you know, sort of the group that oversees the board. So like that's your checks and balances. And then officers are the individuals who are like employed by the foundation itself. So, you know, directors manage the affairs of the corporation. They, you know, the number of board members is determined by the board. So complete control of the board, very, very safe way to determine the board members. We have added that like, or no, here's directors shall be elected at the meeting of the members to serve a 3-year term. This is where maybe the 1-year term has benefits, but it could also have downsides. Like if your whole board turns over in 1 year, then do you end up with like no board members? So is there a push to maybe have a random board member be taken off every year, but then can be voted back on accordingly? So that was another piece of governance that was in the Singapore default bylaws, but not in the nonprofit bylaw defaults that we see here. You know, directors may be removed by the vote of the members or 2/3 of the directors. So this is where we see like members have power, but the board of directors also have power. And then if, you know, if someone can't serve their term, the members actually get to choose the successor. So yeah, this is sort of like number of directors, hold annual meetings. There's a lot of language in the bylaws that are around like, you know, if they don't vote at this meeting, they can call a meeting. That meeting can do whatever it wants as long as it's, you know, the board is notified in advance what will happen at that meeting. So that a lot of that language maybe is just useful, but not very directive of what would happen. I think, yeah, the membership portion is where it gets really interesting because, you know, what do these members do? They elect board of directors. They, as you can see, they can vote to replace a director. They have voting power, some members do. They can actually delegate their voting to someone else if they wanted to. So some of the stuff we've seen get pushed on chain at different blockchain companies or projects, but I think for us, like keeping it off chain in the beginning is a big priority because I think it gets a little messier until we know that the voting works, and then we can do something more innovative over time. But this is kind of like, I think, a really key thing. And then if you look at like Zcash's, their amendments, they actually have one with the members. So let me just go back. This is their bylaws. That's conflicts of interest, which is something we may want to include. Members, a voting member. This is about proxy, and then like how that proxy actually gets served. And like you can do it like remotely and not other ways. So yeah, that's meetings of the board, like they kind of change how that is. Like notice, things like that, officers, executive director. So, so yeah, that's kind of the overview of the bylaws. I'm happy to share that in our Discord group as well, just like those bullet points, but you can see how the bylaws are not very specific, especially around things like technical governance. And that's why I think this separate SIP process serves a greater purpose to the blockchain than just like the organizational governance that we see in these bylaws. But I'll pause in case there's any questions there. I know we're like right at 11.
Are right, well, I'll definitely say thank you very much for sharing that. It was fun to look that over, and I'm excited to see this form. I mean, this part is such an exciting time. I get a little giddy every time we get a little closer. So that is awesome. Before we close everything out, though, I did want to leave it open. Were there any other comments or anything we'd like to cover? All right, well, I think that finishes out for today. And just as a second reminder, I know I said it earlier, but our next call will be on May 20th at the same time. That'll be call number 13, and I look forward to seeing everybody there. Take care.
Jason.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Take care, all. Good to see you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Have a good week.
Take care.